Welcome to the True Commercial Real Estate Podcast, your ultimate investor resource for all things truly commercial. Whether you're interested in industrial, retail, medical office, storage, single tenant, or any other type of non-residential real estate investment, this is your podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the True Commercial Real Estate Podcast. I'm Logan with my co-host Aurelian.
Hey.
Today our guest is David Liggitt. David is the founder and CEO of Data Center Hawk. He's been active in the data center industry since 2007. Before becoming an entrepreneur, David managed data center transactions for Fortune 500 companies with CBRE, the global real estate, commercial real estate company. He's been passionate about helping industry professionals make well-informed decisions. So welcome to the podcast, David Liggitt. Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. We're psyched about the podcast today. We're going to talk about data centers, which is not something we've talked about, and probably is not something a lot of our listeners even know what that is. So
Sure.
We're going to dive into that and a little bit about your background and understand this asset class. So appreciate you being here.
Right on. Well, I'm excited to get to share, and I can talk about data centers until I'm blue in the face. So we certainly won't have a content issue here at all. So excited to be here.
Go. Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'll kick off and I'll ask a few questions and then I'll pass the ball over to Aurelian and we'll go from there. So, one of the questions, and I think just for everybody involved to start here, this was actually our second or third question, but I want to move it up to the front because I think everybody is thinking in their mind right now, what is a data center? A lot of people probably don't know that. So could you start by just giving us a broad sense of what is a data center exactly so our audience can kind of know what we're talking about?
Yeah, you bet. One of the interesting things is that your audience and all of us use data centers every day. We just don't realize it, or we don't always tie what we're doing to the actual data center itself. So, the way we at Data Center Hawk define data centers are basically buildings, facilities that hold a company's servers that allow them to run their applications. So if you're in the traditional commercial real estate industry and you think about the office market, the multifamily market, the industrial market, whatever those different asset classes are, we are tracking specifically the data center asset class, which are, physical buildings that have the HVAC, the electrical, mechanical, all the equipment to cool the servers that companies just like yours and ours use every day. And so that's what a data center is. And so when you're on your phone, when you're looking at Facebook photos, when you're using Amazon Prime to, order something to your house, all of that data is being stored and tracked through a data center facility. So hopefully that's a good, quick definition and, tying that back to like our daily lives because we use it every day. And quite specifically in the last year, the data center industry has grown incredibly a lot because of the work from home requirements that we've had from COVID and all those different things.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. That's awesome. So give us a little bit about your personal background. What did you do before data centers and what do you do now with Data Center Hawk in that market? Walk us through that timeline. Yeah.
Everybody has a moment in their life where they realize what data centers were. Mine was back in 2007. I never even thought about, data center facilities. That's actually when I got into commercial real estate. I'm originally from Dallas, Texas. I went to school here in Texas. My wife and I, we spent 5 years out of college actually working for faith-based ministry with kids. And it was a great experience. We loved it. And then we moved back to Dallas in 2007 and I started with CBRE, which I would imagine most people on the podcast are aware of, but CBRE is a global real estate company.
Sure.
And I started in the office market for about a year and then transitioned into, I got onto a team that was doing work for CBRE companies, clients that had data center requirements. And so I did that for about 7 or 8 years, had a great experience, loved working for that company. And then back in 2014, raised the money to start Data Center Hawk. And we really, what I realized was there was an opportunity to be what we believe is the industry standard for data in the market today. So, in our market, we have, with our customer base, we have data center investors, data center owners, consultants, users themselves that are trying to make decisions, hundreds of millions of dollars that they're putting into these projects. and we are the data behind those decisions being made. We'd like to be. So we started our platform back in 2014 and have been going ever since. We have 6 or 7 different subscribable products that our customers subscribe to, and we serve the North America, Europe, and Asia today. So it's a really exciting market to be in. We're seeing, as I mentioned before, growth like we've never seen before, and it doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So you guys are kind of a mix between consultants and a platform. Is that what I'm gathering? So if somebody wants to invest into data centers or if somebody's expanding their data center and needs some help on, hey, does this investment decision make sense or not? That's where you come in.
Yeah, our data really helps build a quick framework so that people can make quick decisions. So if you're in the commercial real estate industry, you know that there's market metrics that we use, like vacancy rates and the word absorption and all these different things that help us understand how a market is growing or contracting, or what the relevant trends in that industry are at the moment. We track that specifically for data center markets. So Chicago, Dallas, Phoenix, London, Toronto, all these different places across the world. We track those metrics just like you would on the commercial real estate side. And we've been doing that now since 2014. And the fun thing is we have these really rich data sets now that tell the story about the growth behind, the Dublin data center market, or what's taking place in Singapore, what's going on in Silicon Valley. And all of that information is really helpful for people when they're trying to understand, hey, where do I invest the next $250 million in the data center project? Sure.
No, that's fantastic. That's awesome. So you'd mentioned a little bit about your background, about, where you were coming out of college, working in ministry, and you worked in CBRE and got involved in a little bit of this. So what made you choose specifically data centers? Like, okay, this is I'm taking the entrepreneurial leap into data centers. What made you make that final choice?
A couple things. Number one, I saw an opportunity. Most of the commercial real estate asset classes, there's a lot of people in some form or fashion in those worlds. It might be on the brokerage side, it might be on the capital investment side. Just depending on what market you're in. In the data center world at the time, it was really young, and to be honest, it still is. But I just saw that there was an opportunity to really solve some pain points that we were seeing some of our customers and us, to be honest, experience. So that was one side of it. Two, I looked at it and I thought, I don't see any companies depending less on technology. And so at some point that technology and the dependence on that is growing, these server footprints. And, certainly technology's gotten more efficient, and server, cooling technology has improved over time, but the world is using data at an exponentially growing rate. And so when those things were together, and that's, those were the things that I used to go, hey, this would really make sense to pursue and to invest in and become an expert in, and really try to figure this out. And that was really the moment for me where I said, I'm going to do this. And I'd love to say I was probably more lucky than I was smart as it relates to, an industry growing, but man, it's been a rocket ship. When you look at how much demand has been in the market and what's taken place, in our world in the last 5 years, and how that directly has really impacted the data center space.
Sure. I mean, I just look at, my cell phone, and I look at the amount of data that I used 6 years ago, and I had like a 4 gig data plan. And then if you look on your cell phone, the usage you have now, it's like hundreds of days. It's unbelievable. And that's got to go somewhere, right?
Right.
All of that has to be transmitted somewhere. So
right on.
That's phenomenal. We're going to move a little bit into building specific type stuff of what these assets look like. I'm going to pass it over to Aurelian. He can get us kicked off there to talk about the buildings themselves.
Yeah. Usually, what type of tenants do you see? Is it a single tenant or multi-tenant space?
Well, we see both. Multi-tenant data centers are popular and have grown in the last, I'd say 5 to 8 years. One of the things a lot of companies, if you think about Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies, one of the really challenging things 10 to 15 years ago with those companies was getting them to be in a position where they could take their critical IT infrastructure. So think about their HR systems and their financial systems and all of the production data centers that they had, and actually be in a facility with another tenant. For some of them, that did not equate because they want control over those facilities and they want to make sure they know exactly what's happening. So it was probably 10 to 12 years ago that the data center operator community data center owners created facilities that could actually house multi-tenants in an environment where they felt comfortable. They felt like, number one, their infrastructure was going to stay on all the time. Number two, it was secure. So there was, no issue with anyone else coming into their space physically or from a digital perspective, a cybersecurity standpoint. And three, that there would be continual provision and thought around how to maintain these facilities moving forward. So that's what really grew the multi-tenant space. The single tenant side of things, we have seen really emerge as you think about some very large companies out there today that are cloud service providers. So think about Amazon and Microsoft and Google. Some of those companies, they actually have the physical footprint and need for buildings that are just their own. So depending on what the company is and what they're doing today and their scale, that will really determine whether they want to pursue the path of like a multi-tenant facility or a single tenant facility. But we have seen both of those grow and increase over the last 5 years for sure.
Okay. And so you mentioned Amazon, Microsoft. Do those big companies that are really so focused on the cloud and data, do they own their own spaces or do they rent them?
That's a great question too. They actually do both. We have, I would say back, if you take the industry back 10 years ago, what we were finding was that those big companies traditionally were looking in rural markets where they could benefit from either leftover infrastructure, think like a lot of power or water that was, unused. They'd look for those areas. They would also look for areas where they could capture aggressive tax incentives that would be requiring to those markets. So that landed them in places like Iowa and the Dales, Oregon, and rural North Carolina, just, some places like that. What we witnessed over the last 5 years is those companies found that actually being in the populated areas, closer to larger cities was really valuable for them. As you think about supporting applications related to streaming content and, their ability to deliver their solutions effectively to the end users. And that requires them to be close to those end users. So they really started investing in areas that had a lot of people. So Dallas, Chicago, Phoenix, Silicon Valley, Northern Virginia, Atlanta, those type of markets, we saw really grow from a leased perspective from those companies in the last 5 years. And they're also building in those markets as well. And it's, it's fascinating to watch the strategy played out by those companies, because these are the companies that businesses depend. I mean, they have to have access to these documents, this infrastructure for businesses to succeed. And these are the buildings. This is the footprint that's making it happen.
Cool. And so you mentioned climate, so there are two aspects, I guess. Is it so these centers need special climate, or can they be built anywhere? And you've mentioned different areas of the country, of the world, and also inside those buildings. How do you keep? What are the conditions that are required? Like what temperature usually and humidity?
Yeah, well, let's work inside out. Both are really good questions and have a significant impact on geography and cost, which are two very important things when anyone is making a significant like real estate decision. When you think of inside the data center facility, most of these servers produce a lot of heat. So in order for them to work effectively, the more heat you have, the more cooling you need to apply so that these systems can work effectively. So most data center facilities they're either air cooled or water cooled, and they will utilize these cooling systems to make sure that they're creating an environment where companies can know that, hey, if I put my servers in this space and we hook this all up, that it's going to work effectively and as our lease agreement or master service agreement might say. As it relates to the geography, like the city you place the facility in and how that impacts, there are scenarios where you can utilize outside air to reduce some of the cooling aspects of the building from a cost standpoint and an operations standpoint. And that has to do with some combinations of the air temperature outside as well as the humidity. But if you can find areas where the data center industry likes to, state we have the little moniker free cooling. And there's certain days a year where the climate falls into a category where you can utilize that outside air to do that. That's where it would make sense to be in different environments. And so that certainly is evaluated. And it's one of the things that when a data center operator is thinking about building a building, they are aware of these environmental differences and how that can impact the cost and operations of a facility. So both of those things are really important and are considered for every data center project.
And very interesting. And in terms of inventory, do you see a lot of new structures coming up, or is it possible to reuse older structures and revamp them and then to use them as data centers? How does that work?
Yeah, so the data center industry is in a really interesting place right now because of the age of this market that we're in. So if we just go to like the normal, like industrial market, there's been companies that have been utilizing industrial space for distribution for a long time. Right. And so you have a lot of second and third, fourth generation spaces that, are being used, and there's a process of that taking place. I would say that the data center industry is really in like the first stage of these spaces coming back online in certain markets. And so we're seeing, some space and power become available again. So that's been an interesting trend to watch in our market. And I would tell you, it's not like every data center owner right now is experiencing that, because some very successful, $100 of millions to $1 billion companies, started literally like 3 or 4 years ago. So they haven't had that tenant role yet that, some of these other more traditional asset classes have seen. And then the other thing I would mention is one trend that we see in the data center industry, not just here in North America, but in Europe and Asia too, is pre-leasing, continuing to increase. And the reason that is because there's a number of those bigger companies that realize that to get the power, the infrastructure to the site at the timeline they need, might be 2 or 3 years out. And so they've really got to say, hey, we want this right now so that the investments can be made to deliver the power and infrastructure when that can be done. But most of those big projects, typically, when they are delivered, they're actually pre-leased already. So as you guys know, just from being in real estate, that allows you to do certain things when you're able to pre-lease facilities versus delivering, speculative capital and having to wait for that to get leased. We typically don't see a lot of vacancy in this space. Some markets have higher rates than others, but for the most part, if the space is built, someone is going to take it. And I wouldn't say that happens automatically or, in every market, but I would say like there's not gigantic gluts of data center power and space out there where, they just can't lease right now.
Okay, thank you. And you've talked about big players like millions of dollars, billions of dollars. Is there room for the small scale investor in that space, or is it mostly big players?
Because this market is as capital intensive as it is, it really requires, a lot of capital. And so it typically is going to require companies that have access to a lot of capital. There are still opportunities, I think, for your traditional commercial real estate investor to find opportunities to invest in a project here or there, or in some of these data center facilities that are coming back online and figuring out how to reposition those. But for the most part, if you're investing in this space, at a global level, you're going to need billions of dollars. And we have seen, you can just Google, data center investment, and you'll see 20 articles just probably in the last, 6 months of companies that have, extended their credit lines or, drawn significant capital to position themselves to handle the growth that we all believe is coming. And it just is, because these facilities are so big, the infrastructure is so expensive, you have to have a lot of capital to do it.
Yeah. Really, and you might, if I interrupt and tag a question on top of that. So I guess my brain is now thinking, if they're investing all this money, are there scenarios where people are investing into just a blanket shell building, and then they're leasing that out to data center companies who then come out and build out the infrastructure to lease that, to then release to another company? Or is it typically someone's going in, they're building a building, they're installing the servers, they're getting everything set up, and then going from there? How does that kind of play out?
Yeah, it's a great question, especially if you're an investor, because it has to do with how much capital you're going to spend on a spec basis. And there's a concept we have in the data center industry called the powered shell, which basically just means we're going to build, the building components. And typically this is a building that's like hardened to withstand winds of up to 150 miles an hour. It's, you bring the basic power and fiber elements to the building, but the inside is just a shell. And there's a certain cost to that. We've seen that those development trends increase over the last, I'd say 12 to 18 months. Probably will continue to see that. We have seen less of people actually delivering the infrastructure on a spec basis, unless it's a major market and you've got the historical data, which actually we have, but you're a data center operator and you're going, hey, we know that on a annual basis, we're going to deliver 6 megawatts of power in this market. So we know we need to have the UPS systems and the generators and all that stuff already installed because we have that history. If you're in another market, you're probably doing it more on a shell basis, and you're really trying to just get ahead of the timeline. Speed to market in this business means everything. And it's one of the reasons, like if you look at our data in markets like Northern Virginia, Chicago, Phoenix, Dallas, in the last 5 years, we've seen, we track a category called planned power, which is just basically planned projects. So data center operators that are buying land and saying, hey, we can deliver 60 megawatts on this site in Toronto, over a 5 to 10 year period. And so we've seen those planned power metrics really grow over the last 5 years because those companies have said, hey, we really want to get ahead of the demand. So we're not having to acquire the site and go through the permitting and all the things it's going to take. We can just be ready to meet the timeline and take care of those necessary items. And so sometimes companies will just go ahead and actually build that shell, which is the question that, you asked before, to get ahead of that timeline. And I think we'll see that, moving forward. It doesn't look like that trend is going to change at all.
Cool. So we've covered most of our questions, and so we posted on our Facebook group, the opportunity for our audience and our members to ask questions. So I have a few. I'm gonna pass along. Do you need to be a tech expert to invest in data centers? Is there a knowledge requirement that's prohibitive?
Well, the first thing I would say is it's not rocket science. So if David Liggitt's figured it out, you can jump into and be a part of it. But I would just say this, there are some nuances. So if you're, maybe we level set this, if you're in the traditional commercial real estate investing into different asset classes, the data center industry does have some nuances around, absorption and vacancy and pricing, the lease structure, who's doing that are really important to understand. I'll give you a good example. We track our market space by the amount of power that has been delivered to be leased versus the amount of square footage. So, where we would say, hey, the Northern Virginia market is the largest data center market in the world, we would not quote square footage. We would quote it's over 1,600 megawatts of commissioned power that's been delivered. And so there's just some nuances around that it's important to understand before you go investing in this, in this space. Like there's, if I was investing, I would just say like, I want to understand these things. I want to build that framework. How quickly can we build that framework and truly understand it before I'm going to go and, invest here or there. And that's probably the most important thing. Is just the framework is different, but, there's never been more capital in the space than there is today. And that's, a good and a challenging thing, just depending on who you're talking to. But there's certainly people that believe that investing in the space is worth it. And that's going to continue, especially over the next few years.
And in terms of, we talk about, so when we invest in commercial real estate, we think expenses. What are the typical expenses when you deal with data centers? Like, are there property management companies, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, the main expense is the power cost, and that is looked at on a market by market basis. And there's certainly some nuances to understanding that power cost, but every company is going to pay a cost per kilowatt hour of the energy that they use. And that cost is typically a pass through in any of these leases that are done, that certainly as you get to the bigger leases that take place in the market. So that's the biggest cost that you're going to pay from a data center perspective. You will also pay, like, if you think about like the triple net expenses of, other commercial real estate asset classes, there are certainly some of those that resemble more of a real estate feel that are either in the rate itself, or there are triple net rates where that does get broken out. We've seen that lease structure take place typically for like single tenant users that can operate a facility on their own. And they do want to try and do it maybe on a less expensive basis or something like that. But, those are, when you think about data center expenses, the main expense is the power cost.
That's interesting. Another question. So we talk a lot about the safety, and are those data centers guarded? Or is it are these safe places, or is it a challenge?
Yeah, so certainly the security aspects of data center facilities are really important, especially if a company is going to say, hey, we're going to put our most important digital assets, within this facility. They want to know that it is well protected physically. So typically what you'll see if you're driving by a data center, you'll see like a K-rated gate fence that, you wouldn't be able to drive a truck through. It's so reinforced. There's a security gate that you drive through that is going to allow you to basically, like, there's a guard there that would check that you're one, who you are, you're two, supposed to be there. Then that allows you to actually drive up to the building when there's, typically some sort of like door access and another security person to get in, even before you get into the area where you would be able to walk into the data center space itself. You've got to be escorted by somebody. And then there's either biometric scanners or like, any type of, and just depending on the company, it can be even more secure than that. So these are the most, other than like a government related building, agency building, these are the most secure buildings out there.
Wow. And in terms of energy consumption, and it may be a trick question, but do you know, so the growth is exponential, you say, and in terms of energy, do we know what it represents, for example, for the US, what percentage of the energy consumed on an annual basis? Or
yeah, so that's something that there's a quote and like a reference that a lot of people make in the industry, and I can't actually tie it back specifically to the source, but that the data center industry uses 2 to 5% of the world's electricity. Wow. And so if you think about that, obviously it's a big number. It's one of the reasons that over the last 10 years, data center operators in the US, Europe, and Asia, Latin America, everywhere have focused on renewable energy and how to continually work on creating infrastructure that requires the least amount of electricity possible, that is building sustainability standards into the way that they architect and design the space. And it's just really thinking about the environment as a whole. And that I would, like 10 years ago when I got in the space, it was kind of being talked about, but it is a heavy focus today, and not just by the data center operator community, but also by the users themselves. Those big companies I mentioned before, I mean, they have teams of people focused on these initiatives and how important they are for, our environment to continue to function the way it needs to, but also the balance of, that we're continuing to use and grow and create our digital footprint. And when you bring those two together, it certainly is a balancing act. But I commend our industry. I think our industry has done a really good job. It's not a cheap, effort to initiate. I mean, there's a lot of cost that comes to building those standards and investing in that. And I think our industry's done a really good job of that.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a follow-up question, and
yeah,
I don't know if you have a stat for it or not. You had mentioned that, aside from a traditional lease, or kind of different from a traditional lease, you'd see where it'd be cost per square foot. If this is like a warehouse style building, have you broken that cost per, I think you said megawatt, or what's the unit that you use, price per megawatt?
Price per kilowatt.
Kilowatt. Okay.
Yep.
Price per kilowatt. Have you broken that down to see how that compares, like on a square foot basis, to show that it would kind of compare, or is it all over the place when you compare those two numbers?
Yeah. I mean, it can be anywhere from like, $1,000 a square foot to, higher. I mean, the cost metrics behind building a megawatt, you'll hear some of the publicly traded data center operators communicate that, it can be anywhere from like $7 to $10 million a megawatt to build. That's just for just depending on whether that's for the infrastructure or the building shell itself. Sure. That's the general like metrics that they use from a construction standpoint. Okay. And then the rent is done on a price per kilowatt per month basis. So that's another thing. Like most real estate professionals probably are used to the price per square foot, either per month or per year. Yep. And so it's just a different like metric to understand how these leases work. And we've seen those prices compressed over the last 5 years because there's been more competition. This has become much more of a competitive market. And that has really driven some of those prices down. The other thing is the facilities have become much more efficient. So they're spending less to build. So we've seen the prices decrease as well. But it's that part of it is different than the normal, our normal commercial real estate world would operate. Sure.
Very cool.
That's a good question. And in terms of, in commercial, we use, cap rate and cash on cash. And we have sort of an idea of the returns right now. Are there similar concepts to evaluate, to compare investments?
Yeah. I mean, you'd have your typical like returns on projects that you're working on, back, I would say 10 years ago, one of the reasons that a lot of investors were drawn to the space is because, if your traditional commercial real estate office project was getting you 5 to 7 or 8% return, your data center project was getting you in the teens, you're in the 14, 15, 16% return. So it was a very interesting space to be in. That model's changed. Those returns have decreased, as you can imagine. But there's still, projects that, earn investors high single digits, to higher than that, just depending on, what the project is, where it's located, et cetera. So, that's typically like what we've seen be the metrics that, companies have used to evaluate projects. There's obviously cap rates, that we'll look at on assets that are traded, and we've seen those, decline. So obviously pricing is at a high in certain markets, and that's been a trend that I don't see that going away anytime soon, especially with the amount of capital that's in the space today and people that are, wanting to buy what they are.
Yeah. You've got a lot of capital floating out there. Borrowing money is as cheap as it's ever been.
Yep.
So, yeah. Yeah. It makes sense.
Okay. So I've exhausted the questions that we had from the audience.
Yeah. So, we've got a few questions left. The last one that I would jump to is, what would your advice be for someone who's listening to this podcast and says, this sounds awesome. How do I get involved? How do I invest? Where do I start?
Yeah. Man, that is a great question. That was actually one of the challenges when I started in the space, was there really wasn't a great place to go. This was, a growing industry, but it was really young. And so since then there's actually a lot of different places. So I'm going to give you three that I think are awesome spots to go. One is there is a great website called datacenterfrontier.com. That a good friend of ours runs, a guy named Rich Miller. He writes great articles, and it's a great place to go to get educated. Two, there's a website called datacenternowledge.com, and that's a great place as well to get educated. They do a great job of writing articles that are focused not just on like the real estate side of things, but also on the technology side. It's really good. And then third, we have a blog that you can go to on our website, datacenterhawk.com/blog, I think. Is that right? Okay. Yes. That you can use. You can go to, we produce articles on the market about stats every quarter. We provide an update on how markets have grown. And then we also have a really, I would say, educational video series called Data Center Fundamentals. So I think you can get that on our website, and you can get on our YouTube page, Data Center Hawk. And it's 8 different kind of like podcast videos where we say, hey, what is a data center? What is data center infrastructure? What is connectivity? Kind of the buzzwords that you'll hear within the data center space, we break down. So if you're looking to get educated, those are 3 really good places. I think if you go to any one of those, you would go, okay, I've got a better view of this market, and I see what these people are talking about. Some of it's just, if you're in the real estate space already, it took 6 months, a year to kind of start learning the speak and the language and lingo and all that stuff. In the data center world, there's a whole another level of that. And so it just takes the time to understand. But once you get it, you're good to go.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Raylene, do you have anything else?
No, that's it. I really enjoyed the interview and the quality of the answers.
Yeah. This was phenomenal. Thank you. I really appreciate it. My final question was going to be where people find you. You mentioned it there. Just datacenterhawk.com is how they find you.
Yeah. Datacenterhawk.com. On our website, we have a number of social channels. We're all over, I think, LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. Yeah. I mean, there's just, we've continued to grow our content base, not just through podcasts, but through videos and things like that. So we are in all those places. And if you have obviously questions, shoot us a note and we'll get back to you.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, David Liggitt. This was phenomenal. We loved having you on, and I'm sure everybody learned a ton today. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Is Rhett with you?
What's that?
Yeah.
Rhett. Oh, see.
Can he
yeah. Hey,
there he is. What's up, Rhett?
Yeah, you've talked to him the whole time, but you have to.
Yeah, thanks for your help, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Sorry, this is the only mic that's hooked up right now, so it's the only way you can hear me. But yeah, it's nice to meet y'all and nice to see your face.
Yeah, you as well. You as well. Thank you for setting this up.
Absolutely. It was a blast.
Yeah.
Here's David.
You'll find that like finding people that are much better at these things and smarter than you is the thing to do. Rhett certainly is that. And he's done a great job. Any of our content that you see, he does it all. And so he's been awesome to have at our company.
Yeah.